The city was alive, but not in the way one would imagine. The streets pulsed with chaos, movement, and indifference. Car horns blared, hurried footsteps echoed against the pavement, and neon lights flickered above lines of restless pedestrians. Amidst this storm of urban life, a black Cadillac One glided smoothly through the crowded avenue, the unmistakable motorcade of President Donald J. Trump, a symbol of power, authority, and an unshakable force. The escort vehicles formed a protective barrier, ensuring that nothing, absolutely nothing, could interfere with his journey. Inside the armored vehicle, Trump was deep in discussion with his advisors, his sharp mind filtering through reports and briefings. His presence alone commanded focus, his decisions impacting millions. But just as the convoy sped past a street corner, something unexpected caught his eye. A frail old man sat on the cold pavement, hunched over, his clothes worn thin by time and hardship. His skin, weathered and tired, barely clung to his frail frame. But what truly stood out was the piece of tattered cardboard in his trembling hands. "I fought for this country. Now I have nothing. Please help." A message written in shaky, desperate handwriting, a plea that thousands walked past every day without a second glance. Trump's gaze locked onto the man. A frown creased his forehead. A veteran? A soldier of this nation? Left to beg on the streets like this? For a split second, something inside him shifted. "Stop the car," Trump commanded. His voice was firm, no hesitation, no explanation. The motorcade screeched to a halt, tires skidding slightly on the asphalt. The entire world around them seemed to freeze. Secret Service agents exchanged sharp glances, confused by the sudden order. His lead bodyguard leaned in, lowering his voice. "Sir, this is not safe. We should keep moving." Trump's response was instantaneous, his gaze unwavering. "I said, stop the car." For the first time, the pedestrians took notice. Their heads turned as whispers spread like wildfire. The President of the United States had just brought his entire motorcade to a halt right in the middle of a busy city. Phones were pulled out, cameras clicked, and the world started recording. But Trump didn't care about the spectacle. He had only one thing on his mind. With one decisive move, he reached for the door handle and stepped out. A collective gasp rippled through the air. The agents instantly tensed, forming a tight protective circle around him. The crowd grew, people craning their necks to see what in the world was happening. Trump ignored them. He took a few measured steps forward and crouched down in front of the old man. The veteran looked up, his eyes sunken, hollow, but still carrying the weight of a soldier's pride. He blinked, confused, as if his mind refused to believe what he was seeing. Trump's voice was lower this time, but just as commanding. "What's your name, soldier?" The old man hesitated. His lips trembled, not from the cold, but from the disbelief of this moment. Henry Dawson, sir." Trump nodded slowly. "Henry, tell me, how did you end up here?" The veteran's fingers tightened around the edges of the cardboard sign, his hands shaking from more than just the chill in the air. For the first time in years, someone was actually listening, and then, just as Henry opened his mouth to speak, a security agent stepped forward, tension in his voice. "Sir, we have to move, now." Trump didn't even flinch. His next words silenced everyone. "I'm not going anywhere." What happens next? Who is Henry Dawson? What story does he have to tell? Why is Trump risking his security just to listen to a homeless man? Comment below. If you were in Trump's place, would you have stopped? Do you think one small decision can change someone's entire life? Tell us in the comments. The street felt different now. A few moments ago, people had been rushing past, heads down, lost in their own worlds. But now they were watching. A man who once lived in the most powerful house in the country had stepped out of his car for a man who had no home at all. Henry Dawson, once a soldier, now a beggar, clutched his cardboard sign like a shield, as if struggling to believe that someone had finally stopped to notice him. Trump, still crouching at eye level with the frail man, didn't blink, didn't waver. He was waiting for an answer. "How did you end up here, Henry?" The old soldier hesitated, swallowing hard. A war veteran, once proud, once strong, now reduced to shame, silence, and second glances from strangers who pitied him but never stopped to ask his name. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I fought for this country, sir. But when I came back, there was nothing left for me." A heavy silence settled over the crowd. People who had never cared before were now listening. "My wife died while I was deployed," he continued, his voice rough, as if the words hurt more than the cold air. "My son was too young to understand. I lost my home, my job, one thing after another, and now this is all I have left." Henry motioned weakly to the pile of thin blankets beside him, his only possessions in the world. Trump's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered with something: anger, determination, maybe both. The crowd was silent, waiting, watching. Then someone shouted from the back, "Mr. President, he's just one man. There are thousands like him. What difference does this make?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Trump slowly turned his head in the direction of the voice. And then, with the full weight of a leader who had nothing to prove but everything to change, he spoke. "And how many times have you walked past him without stopping?" The words hit like a bullet. The question wasn't directed at just one person. It was aimed at everyone. At the bystanders, at the passers-by, at every single person watching this unfold from behind their phone screens. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided eye contact, suddenly feeling the weight of their own silence. Trump turned back to Henry. His voice was quieter now, but no less powerful. "You fought for this country. This country should have fought for you." Henry's lips trembled. His eyes glistened with something he hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. For years he had felt invisible. But now, for the first time since he lost everything, someone had seen him. Trump stood up slowly, towering over the crowd. His security team, still on edge, tried once more. "Sir, this area is not secure. We need to move." Trump's response? He ignored them. Completely. Instead, he looked down at Henry again. "Get up, soldier." Henry hesitated. His knees were weak, his body tired. But there was something in Trump's voice, something that commanded more than respect. It commanded action. With trembling hands, Henry reached for Trump's outstretched hand, and as the world watched, the forgotten veteran stood once more. The cameras flashed, the crowd gasped, and the world held its breath. Have you ever walked past someone in need and done nothing? Be honest. What stopped you? What would you do if you saw a homeless veteran on the street? Would you stop? Tell us in the comments. Trump's next move shocks everyone. The street was no longer just another street. It had become a moment in history, one that nobody had expected, yet everyone was now a part of. Henry Dawson, the forgotten soldier, was no longer sitting on the cold pavement. He was standing, and the world was watching. But what happened next? No one was prepared for it. Trump didn't turn back to his car. He didn't let go of Henry's hand. Instead, he tightened his grip. And then, with his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, he spoke. "Get in the car." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The President of the United States, a man protected by layers of security, protocol, and untouchable status, had just told a homeless man to step into Cadillac One, the most secure vehicle in the world. The Secret Service froze. This was not part of the plan. One of the agents immediately stepped forward, his hand already on his earpiece. "Sir, we cannot—" Trump's eyes snapped toward him, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I don't remember asking for permission." His tone wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was final. The agent hesitated for a fraction of a second, but that was all it took. Trump led Henry toward the car, walking with purpose, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to invite a homeless veteran into the most protected vehicle on the planet. The crowd? They were frozen, phones shaking in their hands, mouths slightly open, disbelief written across their faces. Henry himself looked unsure, like he was caught in a dream that would end the moment he blinked too hard. "Sir, I can't get in there," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why not?" Trump asked. Henry lowered his gaze to the rags he was wearing, the dirt on his hands, the broken boots barely holding together on his feet. "Because people like me don't belong in places like that." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Trump did something no one expected. He let go of Henry's hand and took off his own suit jacket. With one swift motion, he draped it over Henry's shoulders, the rich fabric swallowing the frail man whole. "Now you do." The crowd erupted into whispers. Some were openly crying. Others stared in pure shock, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Think about it. What just happened? One moment, Henry was invisible. The next, he was being treated like someone who mattered. How often do we make people feel like they don't belong? How many times have we ignored someone just because they looked out of place? Trump stepped back, arms crossed, as if waiting. "What are you standing there for, soldier?" "Get in." Henry swallowed. His throat was dry, his hands shook, but after years of being unnoticed, unwanted, and unimportant, Henry Dawson stepped forward. And then, he climbed into the Cadillac One. If you were in Henry's shoes, would you have gotten in? Or would you have walked away? How do you think society treats veterans? Be honest. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Trump's destination leaves everyone in shock. The moment Henry Dawson stepped into Cadillac One, something changed. Not just for him, not just for the crowd still standing frozen on the street, but for everyone watching, filming, and witnessing a moment that had never happened before. The doors of the most secure vehicle in the world shut behind them. Inside the car, silence settled. Henry sat rigidly, his battered boots resting on the spotless carpet, his hands gripping Trump's oversized jacket draped around his shoulders. He was afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. It had been years since he had sat inside a car, let alone one worth millions of dollars, designed for the leader of the free world. And yet, here he was. Across from him, Trump leaned forward, his hands clasped, his sharp eyes studying Henry closely. And then he spoke. "Henry, let me ask you something." Henry swallowed. Yes, sir?" Trump's voice was low, firm, and razor sharp. "How many people have walked past you?" Henry hesitated. His wrinkled hands gripped his lap tighter. I don't know." Trump's gaze didn't waver. "Take a guess." Henry exhaled slowly. He stared down at his hands, eyes hollow, as if trying to count years of footsteps that never stopped, years of faces that never turned his way. "Hundreds." His voice cracked. "Thousands." Trump nodded. "And how many stopped?" The car lurched forward, the motorcade resuming its journey, but inside the vehicle, the weight of that question hung thick in the air. Henry's eyes burned. None. The truth stung. It always did. Trump let the silence sit between them for a moment. Then he spoke again. "We're going somewhere." Henry blinked, confused. "Where?" Trump leaned back against the seat, adjusting his tie. "You'll see." A shocking destination. The motorcade weaved through the city, cutting through roads where towering buildings turned into run-down streets, where wealth faded into struggle, where luxury was a myth. Henry watched through the window, recognizing the parts of town where no cameras went, where people survived rather than lived. And then, the motorcade slowed. Henry's brows furrowed. This wasn't the White House. This wasn't a government office. It wasn't a media event or a hotel, or anything he had expected. Trump turned to Henry, a knowing look in his eyes. Recognize it? Henry's chest tightened. His throat went dry. He did. It was the VA hospital, the very place that should have helped him, the very place that turned him away years ago. Henry couldn't speak. His hands clenched into fists on his lap. Sir, why are we here? His voice was barely above a whisper. Trump tilted his head slightly, as if the answer was obvious. Because you should have never been out there in the first place. Henry felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. A message that shakes the nation. The car rolled to a stop. Outside, cameras were already flashing, news vans had pulled up, and hundreds of people had gathered. The crowd was buzzing. Was Trump here for a speech, a campaign, a new policy announcement? Then the doors opened, and the world saw who stepped out with him. A homeless veteran, wrapped in Trump's own suit jacket, stepping onto the pavement side by side with the former President of the United States. The media exploded. People stared, mouths open, struggling to process what they were seeing. Trump walked toward the entrance of the VA hospital, Henry at his side. His security detail tried to move ahead of him, but he lifted a hand, signaling them to stay back. He wanted to do this alone. As the cameras zoomed in, capturing every second, Trump turned to Henry and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Then he faced the cameras. His voice, sharp as steel, cut through the chaos. This man fought for this country. The crowd fell silent, and this country turned its back on him. Henry looked down, jaw clenched. Trump continued, his tone growing stronger, louder. How many more Henry Dawsons are out there? His gaze swept over the crowd, challenging them. How many of you have walked past a veteran just like him? How many of you looked away? Pretended not to see? Told yourself someone else would help? The audience stood frozen. Guilty. Uncomfortable. Forced to face a truth they had ignored for too long. And now? They couldn't ignore it anymore. Have you ever walked past someone in need and told yourself, someone else will help? Be honest. What stopped you? Fear? Judgment? Apathy? Tell us in the comments. Trump's announcement that shakes the nation. The doors of the VA hospital swung open, and the world watched in complete silence as Trump and Henry Dawson stepped inside together. A place that was meant to serve veterans, but had turned thousands like Henry away. For years, these hallways had been a place of broken promises, long waiting lists, delayed treatments, paperwork buried under bureaucracy, forgotten heroes forced to beg for help. But today, everything was about to change. Trump walked straight past the reception desk. No security checks, no brief introductions, no permission asked. His presence commanded attention, and within seconds, hospital administrators, doctors, and staff members came rushing forward, some out of duty, some out of sheer panic. One of them, a middle-aged woman in a stiff blazer, rushed toward them, flipping through a clipboard in her hands. Mr. Trump, we weren't expecting you today. If you had given us notice, we could have... Trump didn't stop walking, didn't even look at her. Where's the director? The woman stammered. Sir, I can get him for you, but if we had known about your visit... Trump cut her off sharply, his voice ringing loud enough for the entire hospital lobby to hear. If you needed notice to start treating veterans right, then you've already failed. The woman's face paled. The hospital lobby fell silent. Henry stood beside Trump, shifting uncomfortably, his eyes darting around as if expecting someone to throw him out at any second. He had been here before, and every time he had been turned away. He had heard the excuses before. We don't have space. We don't have enough funding. Come back next month. But today, they couldn't ignore him anymore. A door swung open in the hallway, and a tall, suited man with gray hair and an expensive watch strode toward them, his expression tense, professional, but nervous. The hospital director. "Mr. Trump, I apologize for the lack of preparation for your visit. I assure you, we are working hard to—" Trump raised a hand. Silence. Then he stepped aside and pointed straight at Henry. "Tell him that." The director's lips parted slightly, caught off guard. Pardon?" Trump's voice grew sharp as steel. "Look this man in the eye and tell him why he's been sleeping on the streets while your hospital had empty beds." Boom. A question no one saw coming. The director's face turned red, his fingers twitching as he adjusted his tie. Henry stood frozen, gripping Trump's jacket around his shoulders, his eyes burning with both humiliation and hope. For years, Henry had been treated like a case number, like a burden, never a human being with a name and a story. Think about it. How many Henry Dawsons have been ignored? How many have been tossed aside, forgotten? Comment below. Do you think veterans are treated the way they deserve? Or are they left behind? Be honest. A moment that changes everything. The director cleared his throat, his voice shaking slightly. I understand your concerns, Mr. Trump. I assure you, we have been making progress." Trump stepped closer, his presence like a storm about to break. "Progress?" He motioned to Henry. "Look at him." The director's eyes flickered to Henry, then quickly back to Trump, as if unable to face the truth. Trump's voice dropped lower, but became even more powerful. If this was progress, he wouldn't be starving. He wouldn't be homeless. He wouldn't be standing here in my jacket because he's got nothing left of his own. The entire hospital staff froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Trump exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You call this progress? I call it failure." The announcement that no one expected the crowd outside the hospital had grown even bigger. Reporters, onlookers, and even some veterans who had heard what was happening and rushed to witness it themselves. The front door swung open again, and Trump stepped out, Henry right beside him. Cameras zoomed in, microphones pushed forward, and the entire nation held its breath. Then, he made the announcement that changed everything. This hospital will no longer turn its back on the people who fought for this country. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The reporters leaned in closer. "Starting today, I am launching a full-scale investigation into how VA hospitals across the country treat our veterans. No more long wait lists. No more excuses. No more forgotten heroes." Applause erupted. Not from the politicians, not from the reporters, but from the veterans in the crowd. Men and women who had been abandoned for years were suddenly wiping tears from their eyes. Trump turned, placing both hands firmly on Henry's shoulders. And then, the final promise. "Henry, you will never sleep on the streets again. And I swear to you, neither will any other veteran under my watch." Comment below. Do you believe this is possible? Do you think forgotten heroes can be saved? Or is it too late? The final twist that leaves the nation speechless. The air outside the VA hospital was electric. The crowd had doubled in size, spilling into the streets. Trump's words were still echoing in people's minds. A promise that no veteran would ever be left behind again. But promises were easy. Actions were what mattered. Reporters were shouting questions. Cameras were flashing, and the world was watching. But Trump didn't leave. He wasn't finished. A final, unexpected move. Henry Dawson stood beside Trump, still gripping the jacket draped over his frail frame. For years, he had felt invisible. Now he was standing in front of the entire world. A journalist finally broke through the noise, shoving a microphone forward. "Mr. Trump, how do you plan to keep your promise? You've made big statements before, but will this really change anything?" The question everyone wanted to ask. Was this real change? Or just another political moment? Comment below. Do you think anything will actually change? Or will veterans still be forgotten? Be honest. Trump turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he did something no one saw coming. He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket. For a brief second, everyone wondered, what was he doing? And then, he pulled out a check. Not just any check, a personal check written from his own account. The amount? $1 million. The crowd gasped. Not government funds, not tax money, his own personal wealth. $1 million right there in his hands. The reporters went wild. Journalists scrambled, snapping pictures, rushing to report what was happening in real time. But Trump wasn't done. He turned to Henry, looked him straight in the eye, and pressed the check into his trembling hands. This is your new beginning, Henry. Your fight is over. You don't have to struggle anymore. Henry's entire body shook. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He stared at the check like it wasn't real, like it would disappear if he blinked too hard. His lips quivered, his breathing hitched, his hands trembled so badly he had to grip the fabric of Trump's jacket just to stay upright. And then, the tough, broken soldier collapsed into tears. The crowd erupted into cheers. Some were clapping, some were crying, some were hugging the person next to them. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what it meant. For the first time in years, Henry Dawson didn't feel like just another forgotten veteran. He felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like his service had meant something. And then, just when everyone thought the moment couldn't get any more emotional, Henry dropped to his knees, right there in front of everyone, clutching Trump's hand, unable to stop sobbing. The microphones picked up his broken, trembling voice. Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve this. Trump crouched down beside him, gripping his shoulder firmly. Yes, you do. Every single veteran does. And this? This is just the beginning. The movement begins one moment. One veteran, one decision, and now the entire country was on fire. Within minutes, our No More Forgotten Heroes began trending worldwide. Within hours, billionaires, business owners, and celebrities began making public pledges to help veterans across the country. Within days, millions of dollars poured into new initiatives for housing, healthcare, and job opportunities for veterans. One moment, one veteran, one leader who chose to stop, and the entire country changed. Now let's talk about you. How many Henry Dawsons have you walked past? How many people have needed help while you looked away? How many times have you told yourself someone else will help? It's easy to scroll past stories like this. It's easy to shake your head and say, that's sad. It's easy to do nothing, but you know what? Change doesn't happen because of governments. Change doesn't happen because of politicians. Change happens because people decide to step up. So here's your challenge. Comment below. Have you ever ignored someone in need? What would you do if you saw a veteran like Henry on the street? Do you believe that one act of kindness can start a movement? And if you think veterans deserve better, share this story, because sometimes stopping for a stranger can change everything. The final twist that leaves the nation speechless. The air outside the VA hospital was electric. The crowd had doubled in size, spilling into the streets. Trump's words were still echoing in people's minds. A promise that no veteran would ever be left behind again. But promises were easy. Actions were what mattered. Reporters were shouting questions. Cameras were flashing, and the world was watching. But Trump didn't leave. He wasn't finished. A final, unexpected move. Henry Dawson stood beside Trump, still gripping the jacket draped over his frail frame. For years, he had felt invisible. Now he was standing in front of the entire world. A journalist finally broke through the noise, shoving a microphone forward. Mr. Trump, how do you plan to keep your promise? You've made big statements before, but will this really change anything? The question everyone wanted to ask. Was this real change? Or just another political moment? Comment below. Do you think anything will actually change? Or will veterans still be forgotten? Be honest." Trump turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he did something no one saw coming. He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket. For a brief second, everyone wondered, what was he doing? And then, he pulled out a check. Not just any check, a personal check written from his own account. The amount? $1 million. The crowd gasped. Not government funds, not tax money, his own personal wealth. $1 million right there in his hands. The reporters went wild. Journalists scrambled, snapping pictures, rushing to report what was happening in real time. But Trump wasn't done. He turned to Henry, looked him straight in the eye, and pressed the check into his trembling hands. "This is your new beginning, Henry. Your fight is over. You don't have to struggle anymore." Henry's entire body shook. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He stared at the check like it wasn't real, like it would disappear if he blinked too hard. His lips quivered, his breathing hitched, his hands trembled so badly he had to grip the fabric of Trump's jacket just to stay upright. And then, the tough, broken soldier collapsed into tears. The crowd erupted into cheers. Some were clapping, some were crying, some were hugging the person next to them. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what it meant. For the first time in years, Henry Dawson didn't feel like just another forgotten veteran. He felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like his service had meant something. And then, just when everyone thought the moment couldn't get any more emotional, Henry dropped to his knees, right there in front of everyone, clutching Trump's hand, unable to stop sobbing. The microphones picked up his broken, trembling voice. "Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve this. I don't. Trump crouched down beside him, gripping his shoulder firmly. "Yes, you do. Every single veteran does. And this? This is just the beginning. The movement begins one moment. One veteran, one decision, and now the entire country was on fire. Within minutes, our No More Forgotten Heroes began trending worldwide. Within hours, billionaires, business owners, and celebrities began making public pledges to help veterans across the country. Within days, millions of dollars poured into new initiatives for housing, healthcare, and job opportunities for veterans. One moment, one veteran, one leader who chose to stop, and the entire country changed. Now let's talk about you. How many Henry Dawsons have you walked past? How many people have needed help while you looked away? How many times have you told yourself someone else will help? It's easy to scroll past stories like this. It's easy to shake your head and say, that's sad. It's easy to do nothing, but you know what? Change doesn't happen because of governments. Change doesn't happen because of politicians. Change happens because people decide to step up. So here's your challenge. Comment below. Have you ever ignored someone in need? What would you do if you saw a veteran like Henry on the street? Do you believe that one act of kindness can start a movement? And if you think veterans deserve better, share this story, because sometimes stopping for a stranger can change everything.